I think we can open up the curtain so that there is some kind of movement of breeze. So just to kind of contextualize the film, the film was, the idea of the film was started in 2015, and since then the filmmakers have been kind of documenting different practices that have been shown in the film. And since then a lot has kind of happened in the city in terms of architecture. Like Prasad actually framed very interestingly and correctly in the first screening of the film at G5A. We have had a major architecture exhibition in the city, the State of Architecture. We are now preparing for the State of Housing exhibition and a lot of stuff. And in that time span, like Shreyank, I was discussing with Shreyank this morning, the practices have also kind of seen a very interesting trajectory. The practices that have been documented in the film. We have with us Rajeev, Thakker and Shreyank, both of whom are filmmakers. We unfortunately our other filmmakers could not join us today, and we have Rupali Gupte and Prasad is responding. I hope that you'll be able to join us in a while. But I would invite from you any first questions that you have. Maybe while the audience warms up, I can just kind of throw in a question. What I wanted to kind of ask was that I was just thinking that if this film was to be made, say about 15 years ago, probably the kind of practices that would have been chosen would have been so different. So how did you kind of, one is that how are you now trying to frame the practice of architecture through the film, and how did you kind of zero down upon the practices that you wanted to show in the film?
I think when we started, when we started looking at the idea of practice first, before making a film, before deciding on the fact that it had to be, documented as a film, we were just wondering. Yeah. We were just wondering, first of all, what was that kind of matrix that one would produce to be able to at least understand on a very, simplistic level what the different type of practices were. So we did create a, very simple kind of graph in which we had these design practices, research practices, conservation, urban design. I mean, there were many categories, and there were many practices. There was a huge matrix there. Of course, there was a lot of kind of discussion back and forth on what would be the practices that would go well together. There was no perfect cocktail, I think, of, and why we didn't choose other practices is also not, I don't think it's relevant at any stage, because this was basically, in a way, the film is itself a piece, right? It's not in entirety a question and the answer. It is just a kind of conversation which is happening, and it could be a small part of a larger conversation. There are many people, other people who are also relevant to that. But then we thought, okay, let's see if we put all these people's works together, what would that product be, And actually we realized we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to somehow see an exhibition of 5 practices work together in the traditional kind of way an exhibition is done, which first was very inaccessible to many people. There are many disciplines that, and many people of the city that don't necessarily understand that, nor do they engage with that, unfortunately. I mean, we try as much as we can to do it. So, and when Shreyank approached me at Studio X, he approached me at that time to talk about this idea. He wanted to do it. He wanted to look at practice. I don't know if he was necessarily focused on making a film, but I wanted to make a film for many years from the beginning. It was in my long list of things to do in that thing and about the city of Bombay. So somehow somehow we decided then why don't, make that film on the practice, on the idea of practice and the city together. And so that became a kind of just, it became a method. And first of all of us, we're not filmmakers, right? So, and we're not necessarily storytellers in this medium. So that was a difficulty. And then unfortunately, Philippe and Sunil are not here. But immediately Sunil is actually my cousin. And I know he was so passionate about photography and about film. And I said, why don't, he can do it. Because first of all, we're not going to get any money right now. So we need to make it very cheap. And so why doesn't, he get involved? And, we were very happy that it wasn't us instructing the photographers or the filmmakers to shoot this or to shoot it in a specific way. It was really more about them actually understanding from the get-go what the film was trying to do, and they shot a lot of it on their own. Of course, there were things that we kind of did together as well, but they were able to capture a lot of it. It was like over 11, 12 hours of, of just footage of the city, which we edited down to, maybe 25, 30 minutes. So if we look at then the bigger question, which of course all these practices have kind of addressed in the film itself, I don't think there's one singular answer. And I think that's the idea of doing the 5 practices or 8 practices or 10, that there's no singular perspective or trajectory that a practice could take. But frankly speaking, as an architect, I didn't even think about any of these things when I was a student, or a young architect. I was too busy, with assignments and trying to figure out how I was going to graduate and, what I was going to do for my thesis and all that, and then eventually getting a job. So that was my priority. At the beginning, it was nothing like this, and I'm just thinking how much has kind of changed also in the way that institutions are bringing up architects and training architects to kind of enter into this profession, that this would be a perfect way in which to kind of just catalyze some type of, even if it's rudimentary, but I think catalyze some discourse, and also say that that discourse is relevant to the place we are in, so...
So, just to continue what Raj was saying, we had 2 basically very simple frameworks. One was this notion of practice, which is a belief that we kind of sent out to all the practices that we invited. It was trying to ask this question, what is the practice of architecture? That was the first question that we asked.
So, sorry, this is better. The first question that we actually asked the practices that we invite was also sort of a provocation, because we were trying to figure out the same answers, and we thought that other architects might be also probably would be thinking about this. So the first question that we asked was, what is the practice of architecture? Second is there any form of engagement that they have, consciously speaking, with the city? I mean, what Prasad says in the film is that whether we want or not, we are producing the city and the city is producing us, right? So it's a kind of some sort of an unconscious or a subconscious relationship that we all have with the city. But is there a conscious effort to then engage with the city? So that was the second kind of question, or the framework that we had. And out of the list that we made, so it's sort of unfortunate that the list that we made, there were about maybe 8 or 9 at tops, maybe 10 practices that kind of really kind of address both the questions in a little bit clear manner. Of which, when we approached several, 5 readily agreed to do the film. To be very honest about it, then we said, okay, let's at least shoot 5 practices and see what we get. So, but thankfully we had this categorization very clearly that, we were sure that, there are multiple ways to practice architecture, or rather there are multiple practices through which architects practice architecture, so methods rather. So the conservation became a clear field, activism, some sort of activism, research, even academics, what we teach to students and what we learn from students together with them also is some form of production of architecture or architectural knowledge, as Rohan articulates. So with these 2 simple frameworks, it was basically a kind of a survey of ideas or theses that these people come with, and kind of what we can argue as, or what we kind of probably think as the base thesis on which they operate their practice on, or where do they kind of base their practices upon, what is the key idea, what are the key ideas that these practices actually base their practices on. So this was basic simple impulse. We just put the camera in front and the brief was given and they had to say what they had to say. So
I was just to kind of, because you joined this, I was just asking him how was the selection of the practices made, and maybe you all can kind of say that since the film has been going on for like almost 1.5 years, your practice has also kind of taken different trajectory, or kind of it has also grown. And how do you see the film addressing your practice that you to kind of articulate your practice better, that will give you a chance to reflect upon how was your engagement with I'm sure that it must be a very deep engagement, but on looking back in the framework of the 5 practices, how do you place yourself in the larger matrix of expanded architectural practice? That is my thinking.
So I think, so I have a sore throat, but I think one of the things that is important that you have initiated is this idea of bringing architecture to a discursive practice. For the longest time, we've really been, building, producing, but there is really very limited discursive space that architecture has really kind of engaged in. And a lot of other disciplines are doing that now. So in some ways, this is really the time, and I mean, if you also look at the fact that architects have also started realizing this, and this has only happened, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years. If you look at, some of the markers of where these shifts are, something like Venice Biennale, for example, right, which in some ways sets itself to ask new questions about architectural practice. The latest one was Ravana, who really kind of opened up a whole new frontier. It's not really looking at capital A architects per se, but trying to open up other ways of practicing. One of the limitations I find of even that kind of opening up is that there is somehow there is this understanding that so far architecture has worked within a modernist frame, and so we have to flip on the other side and you start asking social questions, but without, and sometimes those kind of social questions also tend to be very naive, without really understanding who is this social, or what is the social, or what are some of the complex conditions in which people are working, living. People are not passive beings, people in the city. They are also engaging in producing the city, right? And I think what is important in the way you understand, you kind of framed architecture not only as a practice of building, but looked at architecture in the city. And I think all the 5 practices in some ways responded to that. Yeah, I mean, I really, it wasn't so much about their own work because we see very little of that in the film, but it's just somehow trying to open up that domain of how we actually think of architecture in the city. So I think that is an important starting point, right?
I think that's actually a good reading of it as well, and maybe in that, not in the naive sense, but in the abstract sense, because I've always looked at the film also as an abstraction, in a sense that there's, traditionally you could see the architect or the city as these kind of people who are with each other or against each other, right? So there's an antagonist or there's a protagonist. You don't know who is who in the film. And the fact that we don't show too much work, I think in a way, makes this discussion more relevant, than looking and saying in awe, oh, this is what the architect can do, visually or physically, which of course we appreciate nonetheless. But, to try to get that argument somewhat out of there and also connect to, we had this discussion earlier, we had pretty good reaction from people who are not architects, people who were not engaged in the city the way we engage in the city, in the physicality of the city. They were not aware of areas in the city that we've filmed, concept that architects actually do this work, and somehow that, I've had, extended kind of conversations with these people since the film, which I never really had before. I didn't expect that to happen, where they want to meet and they want to talk about this more. They want to actually talk about what's going on. So that, in some sense, is not only maybe not showing the physical, the technical work of the architects, but it's also the medium, right? Film is such a medium. In a way, it's also similar to architecture. It has that kind of, Shaina was telling me during the screening that there's a purity of film and there's purity also in architecture in some sense, maybe of the process. And I think film is just one of those things that just also connects to people. You can sit and watch a film and you digest that information in a very different way than if you see it on a wall printed with images and drawings and photographs, or you read in a book that this is the work of a certain architect and the idea. Maybe different ways of making films is interesting to think about, and I think we were not at all conscious of what we were making. We were just recording, and through that recording we came up with the structure, so.
Okay.
So I have a question. When you show a film, you expect everyone to understand. Like you talked about this medium, which is easy to probably understand, right? So when the movie talks about how the city is made of people, it is for the people. So if you intend to, how would you show it to a layman who probably won't understand what the practice of architecture really is? How will you make him show what architecture is? Like how he is contributing to the society, how socially he is equally important, and let's say, how could he probably contribute to what we as architects should be doing? How could a person who isn't an architect could help us in achieving our aim?
Well, my idea is slightly different. I mean, I don't go to a layman and ask him to explain what he's doing, for instance. One, simply also because it is sometimes difficult to understand, let's say for instance, what a person who's printing a circuit for computers is doing, okay, no matter how simply he tries to explain what it is, because we all go with a certain preconceived idea about what he's already doing, okay. And I think it also happens with when you're trying to communicate or trying to convince someone about what you're doing. I think that in the conveying of what you're trying to do, there will be, of course, some form of communication, some form of exchange of knowledge, no doubt about it. But to assume that the layman doesn't understand at all is a problem of not his problem or not our problem. It's a problem of how two practices do not really kind of overlap. The kind of and in fact we think that we kind of know better, and the layman doesn't understand anything. That is already a problematic situation. Probably he understands far more better things than what architects can claim to understand about the city, for instance. So, in fact, that if you notice in the film, that's also the position a lot of people are trying to, all the 5 practices are trying to take, is to really learn from the city, learn from the people. In fact, the other way around. Is the other way around. The people are already doing a lot of things, and architects probably are not doing much. And then the argument is that what are people doing in the city and with the city, and what can we learn from it, and how can we be part of it. I think that is probably something that I would look at it in that manner.
The clients for such practices is particularly the governing authorities or the city corporation. So how do you bring this agenda into political discussion amongst the leaders of the city or
Thanks, and thank you for coming to see. In this school, and I think with all of us, I think the client, the idea of client is expanded, because client is not the person who pays. For architectural practice, client is not the person who pays. Client is all kinds of users, also the environment, the passers-by, the people who watch it, the people who get affected by it, all of those people are clients. So, and in some way or the other, irrespective of whether you want to know, you affect their lives through your experiments in space and form. So, in that expanded notion, then it's not only the government. It's not, and we also think that government is one of the stakeholders in this large number of actors and stakeholders in the city. There are many stakeholders and actors who can become the initiators of projects. The projects can start from a variety of things. The project can start from flamingos, So the initiative of the project, the people involved, the stakeholders, the actors, all of these are not necessarily the people who pay. People who pay are and probably their stakes are, in current practice, their stakes are actually much lesser, because the time spent is much lesser, So I think as architects, it's to kind of think about this expanded realm of who you affect is useful. So, and then it can start from anywhere. It can start from the flamingos.
This traditional relationship with Prasad is saying that we have to kind of get outside of that traditional way of looking at things. I don't think the film, even though it's about architecture practice, I don't think it tries to explain architecture. It's not about architecture per se. It's more about the fact that these architects now are not necessarily just commercial architects that we're kind of visualizing or portraying or showing their work, but they are people that have that stake, within the city to produce something. So they are just like anybody else in the city that has maybe a responsibility to make something, to ask questions, to have relevance kind of attributed to what they do in reference to that, because they're also citizens, right? These architects don't practice somewhere else and come into Mumbai and then just practice. They actually live in their communities and and most of them do things within the communities, actually, out of all the architects. Samarth does stuff there, PK does stuff there, you know. So actually, and I think I've seen at least a few of them just be people, you know, within the city, for example. So like myself, you know, I for the last 2 months I've been going to this Bandra, this Carter Road cleanup, you know. Not as an architect, just as a person. I don't talk about architecture, I don't talk about urban space, anything. I just sit there for 2 hours and I pick up plastic, you know, and junk from the beach. And, you know, when somebody wants your expertise on what you can do, then we kind of talk about bigger things like garbage collection and infrastructure, and we talk about those things. Otherwise, there's an anonymity also, which is quite nice, that you're just this person within the city. You have expertise and then you're just participating in something. So I think for me, I still look at the film as the specificity of the practice is there, but I also just look at this kind of relationship of these 5 kind of 7 people, just having a conversation about what they do with the city as a kind of antagonist or protagonist. In very simple ways. So.
Do we have any more responses?
Hello, sir. So my question is, we're talking about the social cultural aspects which need to be taken in consideration when we are designing, when we are living in this society. What I want to ask you is, how do you survive in a place where there are like 5 practices which are so sensitive and the other 100 which are competing against you, and they are all the commercial architects. So how do you survive, and how do you wish to encourage the young architects and the practices to survive in this situation?
No, I think, I mean, the practice of architecture is the explorations in space and form, if you want to kind of, you know, bring it down to its nuts and bolts. And space and form does not necessarily mean only building making, you know. Space and form, I mean, there's a whole history of how we think about space and how we think of form. And this is something which architectural education, architectural discussions, architects have been thinking about for the last 200 years. So no longer it is about, you know, it's only about what you call as commercial practice or not commercial practice. I mean, irrespective of whether you do whatever practice, you are in that socio-economic context. I mean, irrespective of what you do, you are. You can't escape. You can't say that, you know, I do not build in the socio-economic context. You are. Either you are contributing to it, or you are kind of, you know, you are engaging with it somehow or the other. So, I think what Rajeev and Shreyank and others wanted to kind of do is to kind of look at where the boundaries of this, so to say, you know, practice can be pushed further. Like having a discussion like this in Borivali about architecture is also a kind of practice, you know. I mean, I was just telling both of them, okay, this year you have 2 films on architecture which looks at architecture beyond singular practices. You've had films on B.V. Doshi, you've had films on Korea and stuff like that, but this year you have two films which are not looking at singular practices as monographs. You have people who are thinking wider, larger about making a survey, looking at how the practice is moving, how idea of space is evolving and stuff like that. And this is happening, and there is one book this year, last year there was one book on, in fact, this city has produced 2 books. One is the housing book, and the other is the South Asian architecture book. So I think it's a very useful thing to kind of, it's not useful. It's imperative that we kind of start talking beyond, because that is only one kind of one kind of way that you can do. You can go, but architectures in the last 200 years have opened. In fact, the practice of architecture has always been this kind of multitudinous kind of ways. So it's not about being sensitive or not being sensitive. It's about how you push your boundaries to kind of explore the idea of space and form, in those multiple ways.
And I think young people are already, they're hungry for more. And we see that more and more in the school itself. People constantly coming to meet us, trying to participate in the school, engage in more things. There's a hunger, and you can see it. I don't think one has to go and, start the act of motivation. I think it's already there and we are seeing it, which is very encouraging. People who come to want to teach in the school, people who want to come in, because we also have these, I don't know how many of you know, but we teach in these, where the course is not taught as 9 subjects at one time, but they're taught as modules. So when the students are engaging in one thing, they're only doing that one thing for a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks. And there are so many people who want to come and engage with that act of, doing something for 5 weeks. And really kind of working with this idea of an expanded architectural practice here. So I think, it's really encouraging. I'm very excited about what's going on right now. So it's not as hopeless as you think it is.
Just to tell you one, it's a very simple thing that cities will have space for everyone. And they've always had space for everyone, they'll continue to have space for everyone. So you'll figure out, I think, what you would like to do at the end of the day. And if you'll continue to do it, you'll find a space to do it, and you'll have people who do similar things. You'll figure it out. It's okay. It's not a dark future. Don't worry.
It's a very dark future. Yeah, exactly. No, I was also going to say, why do one thing? Also don't think, okay, I have to get into this thing and then I have to stay there. And why also, in some sense, commercial architect. Commercial architects need people like, maybe like Rupali and Prasad also to kind of do that work. And I imagine that there's a kind of a crossover and a collaboration between people who have the potential to also build and the people who don't necessarily build or do things in a different way, look at architecture in a different way. I don't think we should kind of shy away from all these other things. I think maybe if you're in a way concerned or sensitive or feel a certain sense of responsibility towards the profession or the discipline, that you'll be able to engage in many different types of projects and works and practices, and also inflect your kind of abilities onto them and also learn from them. And maybe, that's better than kind of keeping things in silos and pushing them to side and saying, I'm not going to do that type of work. Sometimes that type of work needs someone to kind of spice it up or to do something different. So just take it day by day, I think.
Actually, if I could just take the opportunity to extend something that I was looking for in the film, I would actually want to ask Prasad and Rupali that you have been so actively engaged in academia since the last 15 years, and then you created a space like TRIP, which was kind of not purely, it was a research space, and then you kind of founded the school.
what I was trying to understand is how did you start molding this journey? Were there things in Kamla that didn't allow things were happening in Fit, or were there things in Fit that were not allowing things that happen in C? How have you molded this journey? And what was the need for institutionalization of your form of practice in PhD?
Put us in a spot actually. I mean, see like Crete was not 2 of us, it was 15 people. C is a group of 8 and then 10 and now 15 people. There is a collective which is constantly kind of working, and then it's like. And by the way, commercial practice is a very difficult practice. It's not an easy practice. It's like it takes courage and a lot of effort to do it. So it's a belief in this collective, in this kind of organizational possibilities, in the possibility that you are connected and you are kind of you can do, when you are together you can do a little bit more, you can explore, and so all of those things, and also the whole idea that you need an academic space to start thinking about what is happening. In Bombay, I must say that the academic space has been strangled substantially. Until about the 70s, Bombay had a very vibrant kind of an academic space, which created some of the best economists or social scientists. There has been a strangling. There are a variety of reasons for that. And Bombay today kind of, it's very difficult. Bombay University has something like more than 850 colleges, And the only thing that you hear about Bombay University is, it's unable to correct its papers. Unfortunate. The university, it's a university. It's something which thinks about the universe. What have we produced in the last 30 years to think about the universe? These are the questions. And it's not there in our public discussion. We do not have it in the public discussion. What is this university creating? What is this university thinking? How is it kind of, there is that famous book Sapiens now, Yuval Harari. Now, and then there is subsequent book Homo Deus of the same author. Some Israeli author, French university. We were traveling, and cities after cities in Europe are speaking about this book. It's something. It speaks about the people, the academic space, which is vibrant. It's happening in Delhi. Last 10 years, Delhi has created 25 new universities. 25 new universities. The city is full of students and young scholars and young practitioners, and along with architects. So I think that academic space we lost our industries in the 90s, and since then we are struggling to know what we are doing actually in Bombay. We still struggling to kind of figure out what is it that we want to do in Bombay. The economy is in a mess, complete mess at the moment, and you can see it, you can feel it. So because I feel there is a serious strangling of academic space, and academic space was kind of a space to create ideas, to think of the future, to think of what is going to happen in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years scenario, what happened, etc. So the group, the collective, were these people who were wanting to kind of wanting to conceptualize where are we going, where are we moving, what is happening, and that we felt as a part of architectural thinking.
Just because much of our audience is students today, I would, if you could elaborate on instances of tackling, because otherwise it's very abstract.
In Bombay there are 5 big large university spaces. Mumbai University itself, SNDT, IIT, Tata Institute of Social Science, and then there is that NMMIS, Nasir Munji kind of cluster. These are large, big ones. Now, you take the case of architecture. You just take the case of architecture. Between 1970 to 2011, the number of the population of the city has doubled. It's doubled. It's kind of increased by 4.5 million, 5 million. I'm talking of only the city of Bombay. Architecture seats in 1970 was 180 seats in the public sector. Today is also 180 seats in public sector. The government, the state, has not invested at all into creating more educational spaces. It's left everything to private sector, like us almost, of course, and everybody else. So number of seats has increased, but the state has kind of completely thrown away its responsibility to the private sector. So when it had around 80 schools of education, it today has 800 schools of education of affiliated colleges today inside the city of Bombay, and of course parts of New Bombay and Raigad and stuff like that. We were struggling last year. We were struggling because we had to kind of do a crash landing and get into the University of Bombay, for various reasons. We were not with the University of Bombay. We were with the Open University until last year. We were asking ourselves, what is it to study under the University of Bombay? What is it that it is giving us? Does it mean that it is giving us more resources in terms of best of the best libraries, best of the best resources, best of the best teachers from all over the country? It's not. What is it giving us? It is giving us a certificate, yes, but what else is it giving us? This is happening because the same reason, because it's become so big and huge and massive, and it is kind of it has become about numbers and bigger numbers and all of those things, that today you only discuss that it is not able to correct its papers on time. That's all that it does. Or you are worried about where the Vice Chancellor is flying, which country is he flying. That is a discussion about University of Bombay. Can you believe it? Is this the thing to discuss about University of Bombay? And if you look at IIT and Tata Institute of Social Sciences, if you look at the research that they are producing in the last 20 years, they are repeating themselves in many ways. Repeating themselves. Most of the research is funded and it is initiated through a public industry, through an industry. For some, it is done into a consultancy mode. There is no academic research, there is market research being done. The SNDT University, NMOIS, they have been too small. SNDT actually produced a lot of papers. NMOIS has been kind of enterprising in many ways, opening new schools, management schools, and now recently architecture school. So if you look at the landscape of education in this region, you find that last 30 years has been kind of, there's no new initiatives which is kind of reoriented, directed. We don't know why are we producing students. Which students are we producing? Who are these? What are the skills? What are the professionals that we are producing? That is serious. That is a serious problem. And I think some cities in India are doing. In Delhi, of course, it's all private initiatives. So you have the Ashoka University, you have the Kiran Nadar, you have the Ambedkar University is a government state university which is kind of which is really doing quite well at the moment in terms of at least the promise that it is showing. So, and then there is of course, I mean, there is a summarizing book of this event in Arun Tikekkar's small booklet. I think it's called "Who Killed the University of Bombay" or something like that. You know, there's a small booklet which came a year ago before he passed away. It chronicles as to what exactly happened to this, what I'm calling as strangling. So I think there is a serious cause of concern as to where education as a whole and public education as a whole and architectural education as specific is going. I think there is a substantial amount of thinking that needs to be done. The state is not providing. It has to come through the collectives and these mutants who will kind of, mutants like us. When I say mutant organization, it is these collectives, these groups, these kind of various sets of people who will kind of, you know, think a little bit and create a space like this, or, you know, whatever, and whatever possible. But there is a serious crisis.
I mean, it's not only the universities, but I think what is important now and what we're seeing all over the world is this idea of post-education. You know, I mean, there is one thing which is formal education, you get a degree and you get a certificate and all of that. But there's a limitation to that, because there's also a kind of skill minimum kind of standard that you achieve. But people are also engaging in discourse outside the university, and I think that is a very important space to build. This is something that I think that's why the movie is really appreciative, because it's outside the university, right? I've been saying this a lot because we've been engaging in a lot of biennales these days, designed for them, participated in them. And what is really heartening is to see that more and more people we were just at the Shanghai Biennale recently, and there were lines of people waiting to come in and just spending hours. And people from all kinds of disciplines. And that is really heartening to see, because people are coming back to, questioning who they are, what is their sense, I mean, where are they located in the world, what does, knowledge even mean, and really kind of trying to engage with this knowledge about themselves, about the world, in a very different way today. And I think we need more. I mean, you see people have come post